Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a story that doesn't just want to entertain you, it actually explicitly promises to manipulate your beliefs. We're deconstructing a fascinating piece of fiction by Max and Claude called The Conditioning. And honestly, this isn't just a narrative, it's practically a psychological trap. Let's break down exactly how it works.
Okay, let's dive into this incredibly aggressive threat made right on the very first page of the text. The author isn't hiding their intentions at all. They state up front that by the end of the story, you are going to believe something you currently don't. And they actually compare your willing participation as a reader to a cow voluntarily walking into a rendering plant. Cheerful, right? You're already in the gate, and the only direction permitted is forward. So, that brings us to the central mystery here. What exactly is this story trying to make you believe? You can basically frame our entire explainer today as an investigation into how the author uses a really familiar trope, a haunted house narrative, as a Trojan horse. It's just a delivery mechanism designed specifically to fulfill that menacing opening promise.
Part 1. Arriving in Nowhere, the suspension of disbelief. You know, in any psychological framework, if you want to condition a subject, you've got to isolate them first. The author accomplishes this right out of the gate by moving our subjects, the Mercer family, to a nameless, totally liminal town. Just look at the specific phrasing used. It's a town referred to simply as here, described as just distant enough to be forgotten. By stripping away all geographic specifics, the author sets up the perfect suspension of disbelief. Distractions are completely removed, which forces the characters, and us really, to confront their internal realities. Once they're isolated, we see a really stark contrast in how they cope with the unknown. The adults, Michael and Sarah, they rely heavily on repression. They move constantly, and Sarah literally carries around a sealed shoebox of unexamined grief. But the child, 7-year-old Elena, she confronts the unknown head-on, notepad in hand. The text deliberately uses this open, totally unfiltered child's perspective to pull us deeper into the experiment.
Part 2. The Shape of Nothing. Emotional Engagement.
With our subjects isolated, we transition into the story's core mechanism for emotional engagement, Elena finding an entity in her bedroom. So the crucial point is understanding what this entity actually is. It's not your traditional ghost rattling chains in the attic. The text calls it the nothing. It's the house's memory made manifest. Imagine an invisible pooling of time and consciousness that just observes and waits. Elena actually starts leaving items in the corner, and the nothing responds. Notice the escalating rhythm of these exchanges. A paper note becomes a 100-year-old brass button. A plastic toy horse yields a 1924 photograph. A drawing results in a heavy iron skeleton key. This brilliantly illustrates the repetition and rhythm that the author explicitly told us would be used to condition us. And the author builds this incredible tension without ever giving the monster a physical face. Instead, they use this hypnotic, highly specific prose to describe the void. It's called a fold, or a denseness, or a watching. I mean, it's an absence that somehow has physical weight. We as readers are essentially forced to lean in and project our own imagination into that dense, dark space. Part 3. A Lineage of Witnesses. The mechanics of repetition. The story doesn't just rely on Elena's present-day experience, though. It introduces some deep historical lore to prove this isn't an isolated incident. Let's look at how this builds over time. We start in 1924 with a family photograph, then jump to 1929 when young Margaret begins a diary about the exact same entity. Decades later, in 1989, she leaves a final testimony, which leads right to Elena in 2024. This maps out the house's memory, completely validating the concept that time literally pools in the architecture. Remember that skeleton key Elena received? Well, it leads to an absolutely chilling discovery, a secret basement room where the concrete walls are entirely covered in Margaret's handwritten text. This room cements the lore. Margaret sacrificed a conventional life, never marrying, just to stay and be the house's witness. It creates this unbroken lineage of chosen girls who can see the unseen. This specific line from Margaret's hidden diary is absolutely vital. The house passes down its knowing from girl to girl. The text is creating a meta-narrative of inheritance here. It's pulling Elena, and by extension, completely pulling us, the readers, along with her, into this legacy of dedicated believers. Part 4. The Architecture of Grief, the Chute Narrows.
Just as that opening page promised the chute would narrow, we now shift our focus back to the parents. Elena's father, Michael, is a carpenter obsessed with historic restoration, and he notes, "The visible is the least important part." This perfectly connects the supernatural elements to the family's deeply grounded human trauma. Because just like with old houses, it's the unseen, internal, weight-bearing structures of our minds that hold the true weight of our existence.
Now, what's really interesting here is the real revelation. That sealed shoebox Sarah refused to open, it didn't just hold old tax returns or letters. It contained the ashes of her sister who died 10 years ago. It represents an entire decade of unpainted, completely unprocessed grief. The conscious awareness of the house acts as the catalyst that essentially forces Sarah to finally unpack her pain. By accepting the house's history, the family is finally allowed to heal and integrate their own past. Michael secures long-term restoration work, honoring old structures. Sarah finally opens her paints again and beautifully captures that dark, abstract corner on canvas. The family stops running and puts down roots. And Elena, fully accepting her role, begins her own diary, continuing the legacy. Part 5. The belief achieved. The experiment concludes.
So the narrative loop is closed for the characters, but what about us? Did the author successfully fulfill that menacing promise from page 1? Well, Margaret's ultimate thesis, written right there on the basement wall, states, "Consciousness is the ground of being. Consciousness is everywhere and everything, and the nothing is a concentration of it. This is the core belief. Through rhythm, repetition, and empathy, the author has slowly and invisibly conditioned us to accept this exact premise as absolute truth."
Breaking the fourth wall one final time, we really have to recognize the trick that was played on us. We were never just reading a ghost story. We were the subjects of a psychological experiment. The rhythm, the isolation of that nameless town, and our emotional identification with Elena successfully built an entirely new worldview inside our minds, without us even noticing it was happening. So I'll leave you with this. Take a moment and just look around the room you're sitting in right now. Look at the corners. Look at where the walls meet. Consider the history of the space and the memories it might be holding. Did the conditioning work?